This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, welcome to episode 160 of Geek Leader Podcast. And before we get into our regular episode, I want to take just a moment to mourn the lives of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and the countless others who have been murdered due to racism in our country. And this is a time where we as leaders are responsible to stand up and to not be silent and to make a difference. We have the greatest opportunity that we've had in my lifetime to make a change and to fix the situations that are around us. And this is the time that we don't want to be silent. We want to listen to those around us. We want to have conversations. We want to learn. We want to encourage others to learn. And, I'm very much encouraged by the peaceful protests that have been going on all around us and seeing so many people come together. But this is the time where change can really be made. And I feel like as leaders, we can't sit silent anymore, which is why I'm talking about this at the beginning of my podcast. I don't know if I'm going to say the right things. I probably won't, but I'm going to say something. So with all that being said, please, as leaders, listen to your employees, talk to your employees, do what you can, because this is the time that we can make a difference. And today's sponsor is SplashTop. Now, I've talked a lot about SplashTop, and I've been using them for 7 years personally and 3 years through our company, and I love SplashTop. Right now, video producers, game developers, TV station broadcasters, architects, designers are all using SplashTop to work from home remotely. So if you have those high-end, several thousand, $10,000 computers that are doing your rendering and your animation and your video editing, you leave those at the shop. You can take a laptop home, remote into those, and get 4K streaming, really high frame rates, and be able to work with great performance remotely, securely from your home. And it is a fantastic solution. So that enables you to edit videos, 3D modeling, develop games, and you can do really cool applications. You can use Adobe Acrobat, Premiere, Photoshop, apps like Rivet, Unity, Unreal, AutoCAD. All can be accessed remotely using SplashTop while your machine is back at the office doing the heavy lifting. Great tool. Highly recommend it. I've been using SplashTop for a long time, and you can get a discount and a free trial by going to ageekleader.com/SplashTop. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I've got Sarah Wirth, and she is an expert when it comes to leadership and coaching and management. She's the president of a company called EcSell Institute, and they're the world's first and only organization to measure and quantify leadership effectiveness. She's considered one of the world's foremost authorities in metric-based performance, which I'm going to ask her some about the metrics that we need to figure out. And she's the author of a book called The Coaching Effect. So we're going to talk about that as well today. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you having me.
So just to lay some context for the conversation, and I'm sure my audience is tired of me saying that, but we're going to get some background of kind of what your journey's been like and what your career's been like, and what are some of the things that led you into where you're at today and why you wrote this book, and just to frame the conversation.
All right. Yeah, so we wrote this book about a year ago. It came out, and really it's because the company that I work for, in particular the work that I've been doing with our CEO for a number of years, we were really focused on understanding what the best leaders did differently, and hopefully with the idea that others could then go in and replicate it. So our book, The Coaching Effect, is really focused on what top leaders are doing to help their teams perform better, to be better motivated, to more successfully execute their work. And we go into a lot of the research around their behaviors, their best practices, how they're interacting with their team members in order to create better outcomes. So we felt like we had a lot of good ideas and information to share that would be helpful to managers. And so that's really where the book came from.
Okay, so one of the things that you talked about, your book's titled The Coaching Effect. So what's the difference between coaching and managing, or coaching and leading?
Great question. So we like to use the word coaching because we think it has a better connotation for what somebody who's successful in that type of role really does. When you think about managing, you think about making sure that somebody got something done. There's a checklist you've given to somebody and you're the one who makes sure that it actually happened. when you think about a coach, you're thinking about somebody who really knows you, who's built a relationship with you, who's learned about you, understands what drives you, understands what you need to perform, and they support you. They give you ideas, they challenge your thinking, they push you. Sometimes they get after you to make things happen. But we just felt like the word was much more all-encompassing of the type of relationships that we were seeing that the best leaders were really creating.
Yeah, so yesterday was the NFL draft, and it was a little bit different because they were using Zoom or whatever video conferencing and connecting it to the players and the coaches' houses. And I noticed that a lot of the coaches had their kids around them, and it was very family friendly. And it was kind of what you think of when you think of a coach. And whenever someone like wins an award, they always thank their coach. They always thank the one that's there for them. You never hear people say, "Oh, my manager was great." No, you talk about your coach and your leader and those kind of folks. And I think that's a great analogy to use when you're talking about business coaching as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were watching it last night too. And you're right. You see a different kind of connection. You see a different level of relationship when they're talking about a coach versus a manager. So yeah, that's really what we're trying to encourage good leaders to create with the people that they're leading in a work setting.
Mm-hmm. So when you go through some of the metrics that are important when it comes to managing, I know when I first became a manager, I focused probably too much on numbers, but it wasn't the numbers that I think were the right numbers, because I was more focused on like lines of code, number of defects, and things like that. What should I have been focusing on as a first-time manager when it comes to metrics?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in terms of your team members' performance, obviously you have to focus on whatever metrics are showing how they're performing. So whether that's a quantity measure or a quality measure, those are things important to look at in terms of their performance. But what most coaches miss is that there are actually metrics that they can look at in terms of their own performance. So what they're doing as a coach. So some of the metrics that the coaches that we study measure, they study their one-to-one meetings, how often they're doing those scheduled one-to-ones with their team members, how often they're conducting their team meetings, how often they're doing written feedback or doing career discussions. And then they look at it not just from a quantity standpoint of whether or not these coaching activities are actually occurring, but most importantly from a quality standpoint. So through our company, EcSell Institute, we actually get feedback from team members on how effectively they feel like they're being coached by their leader, so that leader can then take that information and adjust what they're doing, and maybe improve in some areas, maybe make sure that they're continuing to stay the course in others. But you can actually look at what they're doing from a quality standpoint and measure that so that they can get better over time in terms of those coaching interactions.
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard sometimes though to figure out the quality of a one-on-one. How do you know if this was a good one-on-one or not? And do you have any ideas or tips? Because one-on-ones are one of the things that I've always struggled with. I don't like doing them. I'm pretty introverted. I know I need to do them, so I do them. And they've gotten better over time. I've gotten better at giving them. We've been doing walking meetings, but now that COVID-19 is here, we can't really do the walking meetings, so we have to kind of do it virtually. What are some tips that you have to validate whether this is a quality one-on-one or just I just check the box?
Yeah, good question. So first thing to make a good one-on-one is you want to start it off with just some personal updates. So a lot of us tend to jump into just the work. Let's start talking about where this project is or how this is going along. But in reality, based on our research, if your team members feel like you understand them and know them and care about them as a person, they're going to be more productive. So you want to start off your one-on-one with just some personal connection, especially right now with the coronavirus. It's good just to do those emotional check-ins, just to see, how are you doing? How are you feeling today? What's the stress level like? Are the kids driving you nuts? Just how are they doing as a person? So that's important. Number one is to start off with those personal updates, those emotional kind of check-ins. The other thing that I really encourage leaders to do based on our research is as they go through their one-on-ones, make sure they're asking a lot of questions about how people are getting the work done, because that's where you're going to understand what are the obstacles, what's going wrong, where do they need support, where do they need better ideas. A lot of times we're just seeing whether or not they are getting the work done, but they appreciate it more when you talk about the how, because then you're actually coaching them on different ways to do the work. So that's another key point when you're doing your one-on-ones.
No, I think that's really good. because that is one of the traps we fall into. If you have many different reports in different areas, you just want to make sure they're getting the stuff done. And sometimes you might not care as much about how they're getting it done, but when you ask that question on how, then you can find out whether it's really good quality work that's getting done, if there's a better process that can be put in place, and it also shows the person that you are trusting them, and how they're doing it, and let them explain it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you want to give them that sense of ownership too. And one of the key things we've seen with one-on-ones is, as you wrap them up, make sure that you're asking the other person, okay, what are your follow-up steps coming out of this? As leaders, a lot of times we're the ones who say, well, here's the things I think you should be doing, but we want the team member to feel the ownership. And so if you have them define their follow-up steps, if you have them say, this is what I'm going to do coming out of it, they just have a different sense of ownership. And that's critical as well.
Yeah, I think ownership is really important. One of the things I liked about the book is that it came from a large amount of research. Can you talk a little bit about the research and maybe some of the coaching interactions that built this book?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been studying coaching for over 10 years now here at EcSell Institute. And so we have a lot of coaching interactions that we can look at. And there's a couple ways that we measure them. One of them is through our survey, the Coaching Effect Survey that we've been talking a little bit about in terms of getting that feedback from team members on the quality of the coaching that they're receiving, how their coaches are interacting with them, how often, things of that nature. And we also have a software that we use, a coaching cloud, where they actually go in and execute their coaching activities. So we can see real time whether or not leaders are doing those one-to-ones, whether or not they're doing their feedback, whether or not they're making those team meetings happen. And then ultimately what we do is we compare those metrics both from a quality standpoint and a quantity standpoint, and look at them in relation to the measurable goals that the team members are supposed to be achieving. So rather than just saying, here's what we think the best coaches do, we actually look at their behaviors and see how is that correlating to better results for their team members. And then that's what we really try to replicate, are the coaches that are achieving those best results. What are those best practices that they're using?
So based off that, what are some of the things that the best coaches are doing differently than the standard coaches? What's one of those like small things that we can maybe implement or look at to see some significant results?
Yeah. So a few things that the best coaches do, they get to know their team members a lot better. One of the things that we hear a lot when somebody has a great coach, they will say in their survey, my coach always has my back. I feel like this person, is always there for me and they're in my corner. So they just do a better job of really building a relationship of depth and a relationship of trust. They know their team members better, and they just have that bond with them. And because of that bond, that team member knows that this is somebody that, understands me, gets me, and really values me as a person. So that's one crucial thing that they do. Another thing that they do is they're really consistent in their own behaviors and interactions. So they're not somebody, if you have a one-to-one with them, they're going to keep that one-to-one. If they're supposed to get back to you on something, they actually do get back to you. So they're just really good at that consistency in their own behavior so that others know that they can count on them. And it also makes it easier for them to drive accountability themselves. Because they're consistent in doing what they say that they're going to do, they're better at holding other people accountable to the same type of thing. And then probably the third thing that we found that was most interesting to me around what the best coaches do differently is they push and challenge people more. Sometimes we think that the most popular coach is going to be the coach that's the really nice guy or the really nice woman. But in reality, these are coaches that absolutely care a lot about their team members, but they push them. If they're not performing, they really ask them to step it up. They ask them to get outside their comfort zone and take on new challenges. So they're not afraid to drive their team members. And we see that a lot with top performing coaches.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've noticed. I've interviewed a lot of great leaders, including several Navy SEALs and military folks. And when you get into the things that Navy SEALs do, is their leaders really push their people to get beyond where they think they can be. And they make themselves uncomfortable. And I think you talk about in your book that discomfort is kind of a vital key to creating some high performance employees, is you have to make them a little bit uncomfortable. And the way that I always relate to that when I'm talking to my team is, if you want to work out, you want to exercise, you've got to be uncomfortable doing it. You've got to tear up some of those muscles before they rebuild in a way that makes sense. And if you're never uncomfortable, then you're never growing. You're never stretching yourself. And think of a rubber band. That rubber band's uncomfortable while you're stretching it, but the more you stretch it, the longer it's going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. And we use some of those same analogies too in terms of exercise, because you're right. If if you're just kind of working to that level that you've always worked to, you're going to start to plateau. You're not going to make any progress. You may even go backwards as the world around you starts to catch up. It's the same thing when you're out there as a team member. If you're just doing what you've always done, eventually it just proves to be no longer as effective as it once was. And you're certainly not growing. You're certainly not challenged. And that's the hard part about coaching, is that people kind of like that comfort zone. We call it the comfort zone for a reason, is because it's comfortable. Mm-hmm. And so asking somebody to get outside that, to do something that maybe they don't feel confident in or don't know that they can for sure do, that can be challenging to get them to go there.
Yeah, I always use the quote when I'm talking to my team that, if you want to be, better at something, you've got to become comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. And that, the thing that if you can get people to understand that, then they just see discomfort as, okay, I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm getting better. They don't see it as something that's so scary. They see it as something that's an indication that they're going to be growing and improving.
So one of the challenges that I have as a leader is when you get a larger team, how do you manage and how do you coach each individual person, or and spend the appropriate amount of time with each person? Because it seems like it's more like in waves. Like I'll focus more on one person for a period of time, and then shift over to someone else, and then shift over to someone else. But I feel like I'm not giving everyone an equal amount of attention all the time.
Yeah. And that's probably okay. I think as coaches, sometimes we really try to force ourselves that, we have to treat everybody equally. Not necessarily, because there's people on your team that need different things. Some people really do need somebody who's more connected with them and that's talking to them more regularly. Others need somebody who gives them more autonomy and more chance to own things themselves. So that's not necessarily a bad thing that you're spending your time with people that seem to need or want it more. The challenge is when coaches decide to just be hands-off in general because, somebody has given them the indication of, just stay out of my business. You don't need to ask me that kind of stuff. That's when the coaching relationship really starts to deteriorate. So it's fine that as long as you're checking in with somebody every, week or two to see how they're doing, you're going to be fine in terms of keeping them on track, and then spending time with people that need it more. That's absolutely a good thing to do. Yeah,
because there's definitely some people that need more attention than others, for sure. And but sometimes I feel like I'm neglecting those high performers that don't need as much attention. And I don't want to do that either.
And that's the issue that some people get into, because they have so many team members that maybe do need more help. Maybe they're newer, maybe they're struggling. And so they do leave those top performers alone. They think, this person's got it. They know what they're doing. I don't have to bother as much. And that is a concern. Absolutely. So you do have to set your minimum. For most leaders, it's going to be at least once a week or every other week, one-on-ones where they're spending time with their team members. So if you're hitting that with your top performers, you should be fine. The thing is, when you're with your top performers, you got to make sure that you're making those conversations a little bit different, because with your best people, it's not going to be so much around, did you get this done? Is this executed? It's going to be more around, what are their new ideas? How do they think that the team could improve? What are things that they could be doing next that they haven't, challenged themselves with yet? And so they need more of that kind of attention around their growth and their development. Otherwise, it can start to feel a little stagnant for them because they know what they're doing.
Right, and it's a good way to lose people if you don't give them that time.
Absolutely.
So, what are growth rings?
So the growth rings are a concept that we came up with to help people understand where they kind of are in their growth journey. So if you think of it, you got your two extreme ends of the spectrum. On one end is stagnation, and that means that you are in a job, a role, a situation that you feel like you are no longer growing. It's usually not enjoyable. We've probably all experienced stagnation at different times in our lives or in our careers. And it's really hard to operate in stagnation for long because it's just not a motivational environment. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have chaos, which it's too much newness. It's too much challenge. You don't feel like you know what you're doing at all, and it feels overwhelming. And you don't want to stay in chaos for a long time either, because again, that's not a productive place to operate. What we try to get people to focus on instead are those middle two rings of order and complexity. Order just means I know what I'm doing day in, day out. I've got my, schedule. I've got my way of working. It's productive. It's effective. It's efficient. It doesn't feel like stagnation because I'm not bored by it. It's just, my day-to-day operating that feels good to me. It's my comfort zone. And then complexity is that step between order and chaos where I'm challenged, but it's doable. It's not something that feels like, oh my gosh, I have no idea. I'm completely clueless. I don't feel overwhelmed. In complexity, I feel like, okay, I'm having to step it up. I'm having to get better. I'm having to learn some new things. But it's manageable. I can stay there for a while and feel productive.
So I think that's a really good, interesting way to put those and separate them out and to realize that you're not going to stay in one area all the time. You've got to move around a little bit, and you've got to be flexible and understand that you're going to move around a little bit. Because I've had bosses in the past that are like, you've always got to be moving. It's just chaos all the time.
Yeah.
And that just burns me out anyway. I don't know about other people, but that seems to be the burnout mood.
Absolutely. Yeah. You need to kind of go back and forth between the two, especially between complexity and order. You've got to have that time period where you get the benefit of, we got better here, we improved our skills here. So now we're in order and we're taking advantage of that. We're being really efficient and we're churning out a lot of work because we know exactly what we're doing. You just can't stay there forever. And so if you move back and forth between order and complexity, you're usually going to be really effective. And what's interesting to your point is it changes. We have developed at EcSell Institute what we call our growth rings indicator. And you can actually go to our website, excellinstitute.com, and take it. So you can see where you are currently. You'll just get an automated report that'll say, right now you're in order, or right now you're in chaos. And it's really helpful information for people to kind of validate what they're feeling in terms of maybe overwhelmed or really bored with their work.
Mm-hmm. And I remember I had a boss, this has been, probably 10 or more years ago, and he was the CIO of the company that I was working with at the time, and he thought we'd gotten, too well defined. We were doing everything very well. We weren't challenging ourselves anymore. We had kind of gotten to where we were, and the business wasn't really growing to the point where we were challenged either as a company. So he called in a meeting with all of technologists, like 80 people, and he said, so what I'm going to do today is we're going to, just for a short period of time, we're going to move everybody around. Not just physically, we're going to move them into different teams and different groups to work with different people. He's like, imagine I'm just grabbing a snow globe and shaking it up and seeing where the pieces fall. And if it doesn't work out, we'll come back to where we are right now. And that was his way of implementing a little bit of this change. And I don't think it's a very good way. I think there's better ways. What are some better ways maybe to do this?
Yeah, it sounds like he skipped over complexity and went straight for chaos.
Exactly.
Yeah, you want to avoid that.
After about 2 weeks, we were back on the same teams and everything was back to normal.
Yeah. If you go into chaos, you want to go back to order. That's kind of the antidote to chaos. So rather than going from, point A to point Z, what it's better to do is like pick some points in between, right? So, say somebody, you're trying to challenge them, they've been kind of feeling a little stagnant and they need something new. Assign them to work with a new team member on a particular project. If they're used to, a certain type of project, step it up a little bit. Give them a project that's at next level of complexity, not your most complex, but takes them to that next level of complexity. Have them work with some new clients, some new accounts. So those are ways to get people into complexity without, shaking up the whole team and creating chaos.
Yeah, I know one of the things that I tried a few years ago was the 20% time that I think Google did, where they said, you can work on anything that's not your normal job for a period of time for 1 day a week and use that as a way to, spur ideas, be innovative, but also try something that's a little bit more complex and unusual than what you're typically doing.
Yeah. I love their 20% time. I think it's a really cool idea. The challenge is that you have some people that are really good self-starters and who will use that time really effectively. And then you have others that are just kind of not sure what to do with it. So you've got to have the conversations with people to ask them, what are you doing? What are you interested in? What do you want to learn more of? Who do you want to work with that you haven't yet? Sometimes you got to ask them those questions that help them figure it out, because it's great that we're trying to be supportive of people being innovative and finding new ways, but not everybody can just go out and know how to spend that time.
Right, not everybody can do that. So another thing that you guys talk about is discretionary effort. Can you define discretionary effort and tell people that haven't checked this out or don't know anything about it what discretionary effort is and what the importance of that is?
Yeah. So discretionary effort is just essentially that extra effort that you're going to give because of the person that you're leading, or because of the job that you're doing, or the company that you work for, because you're really passionate about it. My best example is our director of research. She and I will be on the phone or on text messages or Slack a lot of times on like a Saturday night at 9:00, talking about some of the latest research data findings that she's seen that weekend. She's not doing that because I've said, you really need to work Saturday nights. Obviously, I'm not telling her that, but she just gets really excited, and she's excited about what she's finding. She's excited about what our data is teaching us about coaching. And so she wants to work on it. And to me, that is absolute discretionary effort. She's just doing it because she's passionate about it.
Yeah, no, I've definitely seen that a lot, especially in technology. You get somebody that's working on something and they just don't want to stop until it's done. They want to keep going because they're creating something. They're being creative. They're using their talents to build something that's maybe never been built before, or at least not in the way that they're doing it. And it's one of those things that's just exciting for them.
Exactly. And that's because of either the job that they have, or maybe because of the relationship that you created with them that's encouraged them along the way, but they just get really passionate, and it's at their discretion. And so that's why it's the discretionary effort. It's because of something that they want to do, not something that they've been told they have to.
So your book talks about 3 critical performance drivers. What are those 3 drivers?
Yeah. So if you're going to build a really high performance coaching relationship with your team members, the 3 things that you need to do are: number 1, build relationships with them; number 2, establish order; and then number 3, get them into complexity. So it's relationship, order, and complexity are those 3 drivers. What we see when we study great coaches, those are the behaviors that they exhibit with their team members. So they build stronger bonds. They have that clarity around what those team members are supposed to be achieving. And they make sure that those team members are regularly feeling challenged to get outside that comfort zone. So those are the 3 key principles.
So building the relationship's obviously number 1. And if you're new to a position, or maybe you got promoted into management somewhere, because a lot of our listeners are new leaders or team leads, and they're not necessarily confident in their roles just yet because they're still new there. How do they build relationships when they're not quite confident in their job first?
Yeah, that's a great question. The number 1 thing with building a relationship is the other person just has to feel like you care about them and that you have their interest at heart, that you really care about what's best for them. So it doesn't have to be anything really more complex than that, but it's taking that time to get to know them. So when you're spending your one-on-one time, rather than just delving into the projects that they're working on and how, far along they're supposed to be, it's taking that time to say, how was your weekend? How's your family doing? Right now, how's your stress level? How are you feeling at this moment? How are you kind of working through this and coping? If they feel like this person really cares about me as a person, that's absolutely going to build a relationship of trust. So you just have to be genuine in caring about the people on your team as people.
Yeah. And one of the things that helps me is I try to be vulnerable. I try to share something that, is not necessarily work related. Like I'll talk about my kids, and, because sometimes I'll ask, how's your family? Fine. So did you do anything this weekend? No. Well, me and my kids did this. We'll try to warm up the conversation a little bit by sharing some things that, maybe make me feel a little bit vulnerable as well.
Yeah. John, that's a really good point. And that's one of the things that we also ask about on our coaching effect surveys that the best leaders do is they share about themselves as well. So they're willing to talk about their families, and they're also willing to go deeper than that. They're willing to talk about things that they feel like they do well. They're willing to talk about maybe some failures that they've had if it can help their team members learn a good lesson. So they're willing to be open as well, because it's got to be a two-way relationship.
So we've already talked about, some of the relationship building things that we can do. When it comes to establishing order, what are some of the things that are necessary in order to create that kind of, I don't know how to word this, so maybe you can help me out with the question, but how do I create order on a team that may be chaotic when you get there?
Yeah. First of all, you just have to make sure that everybody knows the big picture expectations that we're trying to achieve. So what ultimately are our goals? What's going to be our outcomes that we're going to measure our success by? So you have to start with that everybody gets on the same page. At EcSell Institute, we call it one team, one goal, right? We know our big performance measurements. And then from there, it's down to, okay, so how do each of you individually contribute to that? What are your key priorities, long term? Also, what are your immediate priorities, this week, this month, so that everybody knows clearly, here's how I'm going to contribute to that goal. If you ask your team members, and I encourage you to do that, what do you see as your key priorities right now? They should have a pretty clear answer. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes you'll ask them that, and you can tell that they're just kind of a little scattered, or they've got too many different things, or, they're just not aligned with what you think that they should be working on. So I just like to start by asking people, what do you see as your key priorities? And then talk with them to get that better in alignment if it's out of whack.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really good. That's one of the things that I've noticed when I would move to a different team or something like that, is you ask each person what their key priorities are and how that relates to the goal of the team or the department. They're sometimes vastly different, and you have to kind of get that into alignment. I think that's really important, and also how your department affects the business, how your department affects the company, and what the key goals are of the company, and how you can better serve that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that makes everybody really relevant, and that makes everybody feel that sense of importance that what I'm working on is contributing, and then also what the team is working on really matters to the company's bottom line, and people want to feel that their work has impact.
So what's the importance of complexity as far as getting into complexity? Because sometimes you have some leaders that say, we need to simplify this.
Yeah.
So how does that contrast with complexity or not contrast with it, actually?
Well, to me, it's cyclical, because sometimes it is important to simplify things. Sometimes we've made things too complex and confusing. And what we want to make sure is that we're not confusing complexity and something being complex. So I'll talk a little bit about the differences of that. Say, for example, flying an airplane, okay, or an airplane itself. An airplane itself is a complex thing, right? It's got millions and millions of different pieces and parts that have to function effectively in order for that plane to take off, fly someplace, and then for you to safely land it. So it's a complex thing. But flying an airplane, there isn't a lot of complexity in it, because complexity is essentially when we move outside that comfort zone and we don't know what we're doing. If you've ever been in an airplane cockpit and seen a pilot before a flight, it is a very rigid process of what they go through. They know exactly what their checklists say. They know exactly, here's all the steps that I go through. So they're not in complexity when they're flying a plane. They're not working on their skills or going outside their comfort zone or trying something new. Hopefully not. That means we're probably in trouble if they're doing that. So just because something is a complex thing doesn't mean that you have to have complexity in it. Complexity is more when you need to challenge yourself and to grow and to improve. For most people to operate effectively, they go into complexity for a while, they learn a new skill set, they get better at something, they take on a new challenge, and then they go back and apply that learning to the rest of their work. And what was once complex to us now starts to feel like order. It starts to feel like, okay, I can do this. I know what to expect. I know what I'm doing here. And then once they've been in order for a while, that's when they need that injection of complexity again, because you don't want them, to find their work boring or stagnant. So for most people, it's just kind of a cycle. You're in complexity, then you're back in order. Then you're in complexity and back into order.
Yeah, for sure. I know sometimes that you want to do something new. In order to do that, you have to go into a complex environment, and especially when it comes to technology, because new technology is coming out all the time. And if you're not challenging yourself and moving into that new technology, you're left behind, and you're now a legacy, developer, or a legacy, group that's no longer valuable. So you want to stay in that complexity, but also, in my opinion, you want to take that complex task and get so good at it that it feels simple.
Exactly. And that's exactly what it means to be in that kind of complexity order loop. What was once really challenging and you had to figure out and you had to really try hard to make it effective. After a while, you do figure it out and you do get really good at it. And so then it does become just simple and orderly to you. And then that probably means you're ready for that next challenge again.
So let's say we've gotten there, we've gotten, complexity. We feel like we're doing everything that we should be doing. Mm-hmm. What kind of advice do you have for someone who's gotten to that point and they want to maintain this or even grow even further? What are some of the things that they can do to make sure that they're doing this correctly, and make sure that they are holding themselves accountable and not going to fall back into the chaotic paths that they were on before?
Yeah. A couple of things you can do. Number one, just make sure that you're a learner. So however you like to do that, whether that's reading, whether that's listening to podcasts, whatever it is that you do that helps you learn, that's number one, because that's where you're going to be exposed to new ideas, new concepts, new ways of doing things. If you're a learner and you seek that out, you're naturally going to be putting yourself into complexity all the time. The other thing that I think is really important is ask for feedback, because there's always things that we can be doing to make ourselves better at our jobs. And sometimes people don't know that we need feedback. Sometimes they may not know that we want feedback because they're worried about criticizing us. But if you're somebody who really seeks it out and says, how can I do this better? How can I improve here? People are going to have ideas for you. So seek feedback and they'll give you ways of growing and improving.
I think that's really good advice. Do you have anything else that you want to add to this conversation for new managers or leaders that are out there that are trying to, be the best boss they can be?
Yeah. My last piece of advice is just to first focus in on that relationship. You can try to establish order and expectations with people. You can try to challenge them and get them outside their comfort zone. But if they don't trust you, if they don't feel like you're in it for them and that you have their interest at heart, it's not going to go much of anywhere. So focus first and foremost on building that relationship of trust, showing you care about them as a person, and then the other things will be easier to follow along.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. So how can people pick up your book and find out more about you and connect with EcSell?
Yeah, so go to our website, EcSellInstitute.com. It's ECSELL Institute.com. You can learn more about the work that we do. You can take the Growth Rings quiz if that's something you're interested in. We have all sorts of resources on our website. And you can pick up the book at Barnes & Noble, Amazon. Some local bookstores will carry it as well. So any of those different places.
Awesome. I'm going to link that up in the show notes as well at geekleader.com, and you can find the book where we have books from our guest. And Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. Appreciate you having me.
I hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Sarah. And also, don't forget that Black Lives Matter. We need to get out there and make a difference as leaders in this community. And also, special thanks to our sponsor, Splashtop. You can check out their products at geekleader.com/splashtop. Get a free trial as well as a discount. I've been using Splashtop for 7 years personally, and over 3 years at our company, and it's been fantastic. We've just deployed several more licenses of Splashtop. We're working great. We love it. Want to encourage everyone out there that has any need whatsoever to use remote management or any tool like that, or if you just want to check it out for personal reasons, because I use it all the time when I'm sitting on my couch on my iPad to connect. Check it out at geekleader.com/splashtop. And don't forget, guys, this is a time that we can make a difference. So let's do that as leaders and as people, and just do the right thing. Let's be empathetic to all those around us, be nice to people, and try our best to leave the world a better place because of us being here. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and if anybody wants to talk or needs to talk or wants to find out more about my opinions or views on things, please reach out to me on Twitter, and we can do some private messages. We can have some conversations. But again, thanks for listening to the show. Really appreciate your support. Really appreciate the growth that I've seen over the show over the past couple of years. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much. It means the world.